Hello, you are welcome to today's lesson. My name is Ebenezer and I'll be the one to lead you through this particular lesson. As you can see, this part of our lesson will be about identifying the main features when it comes to writing tax 1 question. So, before you write the essay, before you write an academic writing tax 1 essay, you must analyze the question. So analyzing the question means that you are trying to look out for, examine the question as a whole in order to understand it. So if you don't have an idea, you can visit our previous lesson on how to analyze the question and you have a full idea of what you are talking about. So you need to analyze the question to have a full understanding of what the whole question is about. And when you are done with that, the second thing to do is to identify the main features. So in this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to identify the main features of the different types of IELTS academic writing tax 1 question. I will go in detail on how to pick out the main features in specific questions in the lessons on individual question types. You have to remember that IELTS is an English exam, okay, and is designed to test your language skills. It's not mathematics. It's not a mathematical question. So don't use complicated calculations, okay, when you are writing. And if you visit the marking criteria question assessment when I was teaching you, I made mention of that. Don't use complicated calculations and when you are solving the question. It's an English language question, not mathematics. Okay, so the pictures are just a way to let you know the information. Okay, so they are just using numbers and diagrams to let you have an information. So your job is to just change those information into written form, and that's all that you have to do. When we talk about main features, what does it mean by a main feature? So main features are the obvious part of the graph. Okay, they are the most obvious part of the graph part where you cannot look away from. Everybody sees it and you are required to talk about. Okay, so they are the most obvious part of the graph. Or just take yourself as a reporter, there are some of the things that you cannot look down on. All right, so when you're going to report it, they are very salient information that you need to bring about. So these are the main features, and that is why you need to report them. So why is it so important? Why is this main feature so important? The main feature is one of the most important part of your writing task, because it's there for you need to bring it out because it will help you to achieve the task. You know, when you look at the second line of the question, when we're assessing and analyzing the question type and how the question is being framed, we saw that in the second line of the question, you always be told to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay, so it means that the main features form the centerpiece of your writing. If you want to summarize the question given in the paragraph, you need to have the main features so that you can do all, like the summary, selecting, reporting the main features and making comparisons. You need to have the main features in order to do that. So for you to achieve your task, right, for you to achieve the task in the writing tax 1, you need to summarize the entire information. You know, as stated in the question, you need to summarize the information. This is why it's important that you don't go or write every single thing that you see. We are asking for the major things within the graph and what you need to sum, because the information is already there, and we just want you to give us a summary, the salient part of the question. We want you to just give it to us. That is what we mean by writing in the academic tax 1. So you are going to summarize the entire information in the graph. And how do you do it? You are going to pick the main features in the graph. So you have to find a way of picking out the main features and describing or reporting on the features that you have picked and write it in detail. So you're going to describe or report on those features in detail, and then you make comparisons of those features. So for you to achieve the task that you need in the task 1, you have to summarize the entire information by picking the features, reporting those features, and comparing the features as necessary. Okay, so you need to do all that. So let's go on to how we can pick the main features or pick out the main features in the graph. So for you to select the main features of the graph, the first thing that you need to do is to identify the category of the graph question. Okay, so you need to identify the category of the graph question and know where it falls in respect to the timeline. All right, so when you take the timeline, there are two different groups of the graph question in terms of their timeline. One, there are those whose information borders between two lines. So you will get some of the graph question which state that maybe it's from 2005 to 2010. Okay, so they are bordered between two lines. Okay, so if you get a question whose timeline is bordered between two time period, then you are dealing with what we call a dynamic graph. Right, so it can be from one particular minute to another minute. It can be from a particular day, maybe from Monday to Friday, or even Monday to Tuesday. Okay, it can be from the morning to evening. So it's always bordered between two time periods. All right, so that's what we call a dynamic graph. You have to know this and be able to identify them. If you want to know how to find the main features, you need to know what you are dealing with. Are you dealing with a dynamic graphs that's found between two time period, or you are dealing with a graph whose information has no time, or it's just within a single time period? So maybe the question is just in 2010, or maybe 2002, or on Monday, right? Or it has no time period at all. Okay, so you have some of the graph questions which come with no time period, and others also come with a time period bordered between two lines. Okay, so now I'm going to give you two examples of each of the type, then I will give you an exercise for you to identify the rest of them. So let's look at an example for both dynamic graph and a static graph. All right, so these are examples of dynamic graphs. Let's look at the first question. It states here that the line graph below shows the population size, birth rate, and death rate of England and Wales from 1700 to 2000. Right, so you can see here that our timeline is between 1700 to 2000, which is two time period. All right, it's bordered between two time period. Now let's check the next question. The bar chart below shows the sector contribution to India's gross domestic product from 1960 to 2000. So you can see here that this one also bordered between two lines, 1960 to 2000. Okay, so it has two different time period. Sometimes you might get between, it's not that wide, they might not be years, it might be months, sometimes even weeks. So from the first week to the third week, it can be even days, right? From Monday to Friday, or Monday to Tuesday, or it can even be hours, right? From 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock a.m. So it doesn't matter. So for us, it's two different timelines that we are dealing with. Then we have to know that we are on, we are actually working on a dynamic graph. Let's check static graphs. Right, let's look at these questions. The first one, the bar chart shows the number of overseas students enrolled in a third year computer science course at a Canadian college. You can see here that this has no, it does not have any year. So the bar chart shows the number of overseas students enrolled in a third year computer science college at a Canadian science course at a Canadian college. There is no time period, like maybe from 2000 2005. There is no time period. So this is a static graph. Let's look at this next one. The diagram below gives information on the transport and car use in Edmonton. All right, so this one too, there is no time stated. Okay, no time stated. Sometimes I get just in one time period. So it can be the bar chart shows the number of overseas students enrolled in a third year computer science at a Canadian college in 2002, right? So that will be just 1 year, and then that becomes a static graph. All right, you understand the reason we need to identify and find them, because I will show you the differences, why they are very important. Okay, so now that I've shown you the differences between a dynamic and static graph, I'm going to give you an exercise right now for you to do. So you have to just tell me whether this is a dynamic graph or a static graph. All right, let's look at the question. So you have to answer the following questions. Read the questions below and answer if it's a dynamic or static graph. So this is your first question. State here, the graph below shows the number of tourists visiting a particular Caribbean island between 2010 and 2017. So you have to state whether this is a dynamic or static graph. Let's go to the next one. So this is the second question. Just look at it and we move on to the next one. You can pause the video and then identify it. So there's the third question. This is the fourth question. There is the fifth question. There is the sixth question. So I would like you to send your question to me. Just let me have the questions, the answers that you gave to those kind of questions. Send it to me and then I'll answer them one after the other. All right, but why is all these things important? Why do you have to know whether it's a dynamic or static graph? When you know the category of the graph question that the particular graph that you are going to solve falls in, it will help you to know the right questions to ask when you are looking for the main features. Okay, there are a set of questions that you need to ask yourself depending on the timeline, right? So you need to ask yourself some questions before you're able to get the main features that you need. Let's look at a dynamic graph, for instance. When you are looking at dynamic graphs, as stated before, they are found between two different timelines. Okay, so you are actually bordered between two periods. So we have to look for the changes that happen between those 2 points. So if we state that we want to look at the number of people that visited a particular tourist attraction, okay, between Monday and Friday. Maybe we are looking at the number of women and the men that visited that particular place between Monday and Friday. When you take the women, for instance, the figures might not be the same, or it might be the same. You're just checking for the changes that happen between the Monday and Friday for those women. It might go up, it might come down, okay. There might be more women than men in a particular period, okay. So in dynamic graph, you're just assessing what happened between those two periods, and then you're looking for the changes that happen between those 2 points. Those changes, that is what we call trend. So when you take dynamic graph, the graph focuses on the trend of the variables, okay. So in that, when you are dealing with dynamic graph, you are actually looking at the trend. For you to find the keywords, the key features, you look for those trends that happen in there, and that is where you assess the changes that happen in there. You're going to describe those changes in the trend and also make some comparisons when relevant. Okay, so that's for dynamic graph. That is why it's important. So take note that dynamic graph, when you're looking for the main features, you're now going to talk about the trend. It's mostly about the changes that happen between that particular period. Let's look at static graph. Unlike the dynamic graph, static graphs, we stated that they don't have any time, or there is just a single time period that we are dealing with. So maybe we are looking at the number of women that visited that particular zoo in the morning, right? And we're also looking at the same men. We're looking at the number of people who actually visited the zoo in the morning. So you're looking at the men that visited and also the women that also visited. Because one time period, there is no changes in those variables. Okay, so there is no change happening in those variables in just one particular day, or maybe there is even no day at all. So you don't have to, you'll not get a time period to say that there was a change in the number of men from the morning to the afternoon or getting to the evening. You will not be able to get those changes. Right, so only focus on just one time period, so you will not be able to get those changes. For that reason, what we do is that we compare the variables to each other. Okay, so you compare the variables to each other, finding those differences, the similarities, the differences, the highest, the lowest. Those are the things that you do. So when it comes to, or when it gets to static graphs, when you want to find the main features, we deal with comparing with the variables themselves. But with dynamic graph, you actually deal with the trends and compare the trends of the variables. So that's how you deal with it. That's why it's very important for you to know. Now let's look at an example for each of the graph and how we can get the main features. When you are dealing with a dynamic graph, remember that I stated that you have to check the trend of the variables, or in dynamic graph you actually deal with the trends of the variable, you describe those ones, and then you compare the variables. Okay, so to do this, there are some set of questions that you can ask, and then you answer them to help you get the main features that you need. All right, so when you are looking for main features of a dynamic graph, ask yourself these kind of questions. First of all, you can ask yourself that how is the graph behaving as a whole, or how is the graph behavior in general. So sometimes you can check the graph in general and you can find out that most of them are increasing in they had an increasing trend. All right, or maybe most of them had a decreasing trend, or generally you can see that the graph was oscillating or fluctuating. So that is for the general behavior. Commonly, how do you see it in general? And individually, how is each of the variable also behaving? That is the second question. So this time you pick each of the variable, each of the keys, you pick them one after the other, and you assess the behaviors or the trend of that particular variable. Okay, and the third question is that you ask yourself that, is there any exceptional variable, or are there any exceptions among the common trends? So there might be maybe 3 or 4 variables, and there might be one of them having a different trend unlike the others. So all of them might be going up, but you have one of them coming down. So that's an exceptional trend. All right, so you have to look out for those exceptional trends. And also the next one is, which of the variables are common, or what are the common trends in there? So you might have 2 of the variables going in the same way, right, in different. So you have to also look out for those variables. And also the last one is, you look out for the highest point and the lowest point. Right, so which one was the highest and which one was the lowest, and if it was the highest, when did it peak, and which was the lowest, when did it drop. So you need to look out for all these things in the question. I'm actually telling you that if you actually follow these particular questions, know the question types and the right question to ask them, as I'm just showing you here, it will help you to get a lot of information, a lot of key features that will help you to write a very good essay. So practice using these ones. Remember, I said that these questions are for dynamic graphs, that are for questions where the information bordered between 2 periods. Okay, so this one is for dynamic graph. How is the graph behaving in general? Individually, how is each of the variable behaving? Is there any exceptional variable? Which of the variables are common? And in highest points and lowest points, you also have to look at that to help you. Now let's look at an example and also assess ourselves using this same question. So this is a question that we are going to use. All right, so we're using this question to, and then we ask ourselves we look at this example and we ask ourselves these questions to help us get the main features that we need. All right, But first of all, we need to confirm that this one is a dynamic graph, okay? And the reason it's a dynamic graph. So let's read. So this question states that the chart below shows the total numbers of minutes in billions of telephone calls in the UK, divided into 3 categories from 1995 to 2005. So this tells us that this particular question is a dynamic graph because it starts from one period, 1995 to 2000. Right, now that we know that it's a dynamic graph, then for us to get our main features, we will ask ourselves these questions. How is the graph behaving in general? What are the individual graphs, or how are the individual graphs behaving? And then we look at if there is any exceptional trend, which of the variables are common, and then we look at the highest and then the lowest point. All right, so let's assess it one after the other. All right, so if you look at the question, this question is about the total number of minutes of telephone calls that people actually make. So it's a three different medium of communication. It's either they are using local fixed line here, national or international fixed line, or mobiles, okay, for all their calls. All right, so we have these 3 keys here, and we know that this is about the UK telephone calls by category from 1995 to 2000, and we know here that each of these numbers is in millions. Okay, actually, yeah, it's in billions. Actually, it's in billions. So 10 billion, 20 billion minutes, 30 billion minutes, and thereafter. So we know here that this one is also from the year category from 1995, 1996, 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, and 2. So we have all this information given to us now, and we know that this first one is for the local, the next one is for the national, and then this last one, which is the deepest, is the mobile. Okay, so our first question here is that how is the graph behavior in general when you look at it? All right, so we can see here, if we check these ones, all of them actually went up except for the local, which went down later. But generally you can see that most of these medium of communication increased in number of minutes as time went by. Most of them, even in the first 4 years, 1, 2, 3, 4 years, you can see that even the local one went up. Just than the last 4 years that it came down. So generally you can find out that most of the medium of communication soared, right, in the number of minutes that they were used as time went by. So let's write that answer down. All right, now we write our answer. So how is the graph behaving in general or as a whole? You can see that most of the medium of communication, or most medium of communication, I'd not say all because of this one. All right, I can't say all of them, so I said that most because it's 2 out of 3, so it's most. So most medium of communication recorded an increasing number of minutes used as time went by. Okay, so that is the total behavior of this particular graph. All right, you might have an idea. You can also write your answer down. All right, let's move on to the next question. Now let's assess the individual method of communication. All right, let's assess them and see their behavior. So the second question is individually, how is each of the variable behaving? So if we take the last one, which is the mobile, you can see that it was actually steady. All right, it remained relatively steady, not steady, it was relatively. All right, because it was actually going up a little bit, so relatively it was steady now for the mobile, but it soared up later. All right, so it just went up drastically later. Now if we take the national an international fish line. You can see it started from here, then went up a little bit consistently. All right, so there was a consistent increase. All right, there was a consistent increase. It was actually a moderate increase in the number of minutes that people spend on national and international fish line calls. All right, and the last one, which is the local, went up moderately. All right, got up later on, reached its peak and then fell. So it went up and fell later. So that was the only one that actually fell in the last 4 years. But all this went up moderately. This was steadily or relatively steady for the first 4 years and then soared up. All right, so let's add our answer. All right, so we know that for the local, it increased and then fell. National, increased moderately. Mobile, relatively stable and then rose dramatically. So now we have that idea. We have written our answers down. Every answer that you get here is very important. You'll be using them either in the overview or in your main body paragraph when you're writing the features. So even if you don't use it in the overview, please conserve it because it will be necessary in your main feature description. Okay, so now we have an idea of how the individual variables behaved. So let's go on to the third question. So our third question is there any exceptional variable? All right, so if you check all the variables, is there any exceptional one among them? And if you can see clearly from what we have been saying, you realize that two of these ones, which is the national and international fish line, all went up. All right, they all increased in the number of people who were using them and the number of minutes that they were spending on them. So it all went up. Though the local fish line went up, it was the only one that actually fell in the last 4 year period. Okay, so it went up later, but it fell. All right, so that was the only exceptional trend that we had. All right, so we can write that only local fish line fell in the last 4 years or at the final half of the year. All right, so only local fish line fell at the final half of the year, because if you check it's 8-year period, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, so it only fell when it got here 1999 to 2002. That's when it started falling. So we can just say that it was the only variable that fell later as the time went by. Okay, apart from that, all of them increased. So now we have that to be one major feature that we cannot look away from. Now let's go on to the next question. Right, so our next question is, which of the variables are common, or which of them have similar trends? So as stated, similar trends mean that they are having common way of moving, okay, whether going down or coming up. So as you can see, if you check, it's only the local fish line that is different. Both national and then the mobile calls increased, right? So they have an increasing number of people who are using them and the number of minutes that is spent on it. Okay, so we can see that these two, the national and the mobile, have common trend. So both national fish lines and mobile calls increased in the number of minutes used throughout the period, and it's true. So this one increased, that increased. So these simple questions will help you to get the main features that you need easily without sweating. Okay, and it will help you to touch on the major things there. You don't have to report on everything, and you don't have to record on everything step by step. You have to make sure that you get the major things in it and summarize it, compare, and then illustrate. Okay, so let's ask the last 2 questions and we are done. Right, let's make this the last question. So the final thing we'll be looking out for is the highest point. All right, which one was the highest among them, and at what point did they record their peak, and which one was the lowest among them, at what point did it also record its trough, or the lowest point of it. Okay, so if you can see from here, you realize that local first line was the most used. Okay, people prefer to use the local first line. They prefer to spend more minutes on the local first line than any other type of or any other medium of communication. Okay, so a lot of people just prefer to spend more minutes on the local period, on the local first line than any other medium of communication. Okay, so that is the highest point. You can see that the highest period was in 1999. All right, so that is here in 1999. That was the highest point where it recorded 90 billion minutes. All right, 90 billion minutes. But when it comes here in 1998, it was almost there. But it is in 1999 that it recorded the highest point. All right, so in general, we can see that local first line was the most popular type of communication and the one that they spent most of their minutes on, followed by the national also, and then the least used was the mobile calls. A lot of people did not prefer to use the mobile calls, right? Though it increased in size later, or increased in the number of minutes people were using, but still the lowest. All right, so let's see our answer here. The local first line was the most popular means of communication, and the mobile was the least. All right, so people spent less time through mobile calls. People spent less time when they were having a mobile, they were doing a mobile call. So you have to take note of that. So you can see that from these simple questions, we have got a lot of information that we can use to write this one. All right, so let's go on. Now that we've been able to get the key answers that we have received, we can summarize the most obvious features among them to write our essay. You have to take note that your features must cover the variables in the test. So how many variables we have? A local, national, mobile. You have to make sure that when you are using the key features have to cover or touch on each of them. You shouldn't leave any of them. You have to touch on each of them. But the difference is that you don't have to write every step. All right, you don't have to write about every step, but you need to cover every point of it. Okay, it has to touch on every variable. Okay, so let's look at let's write down our key features using the points that we have received. So we know the variables that are common, we know the highest, the lowest. We just have to get the key features to summarize everything together. So from the key features that we received here, and from all that we have written, we just write down these three main features for the graph. Okay, so our first main feature, remember, this is a planning method, or in the planning stage. So you write these things down and you can use them to write your overview and also explain it further in the main features. Okay, so you explain it further when you are writing on the body paragraph. So let's examine the three main features that we have got from all the points that we raised. The first one is that local first line is the most common call type in the UK, and that is true. You can see here it is the most common call type here. The second thing we also deduced was that the number of minutes for mobile calls and national first line increased throughout the period. Okay, so let me add throughout the period. So we know that the number of minutes for mobile calls and national fixed line calls actually increased throughout the period, and it's true here and that here. So throughout the period they just kept getting higher number of minutes. And the last thing that we also write here, which is also important, is that only the figure for local first line declined in the last half of the period, despite being the most popular. So despite being the most popular, it is the only category that actually declined in the number of minutes used, all right, as the time went by, like in the last half of the period. That was when it started to decline. All right, so as stated, you can see that the main feature covers all the things I've spoken about. Fixed line here, local one here, mobile one here, national here, local. So I've covered all these three variables, and that is what I'm expecting you to do. You need to make sure that you cover all the variables needed, okay? And we can now use the features that we have written to write down an overview. So we need to summarize. We just have to summarize all these three together and write a very good overview out of it. And then after that, we use the same point and other specific features to also write down our detailed paragraph. So you can write it in details when you are dealing with the detailed paragraph. So this is how you deal with dynamic graphs. The dynamic graphs actually flows from one period to the other. Okay, so you have to check for the strength, the trends, right? So you look out for the changes that has happened, which one, the differences. Okay, so you look out for the general trend, specific trend. All right, you look out for exceptions. All right, so you look out for all these things to help you. So you can go over the questions. Just go over the questions and look out for it. Just go and check, get a new question, and then use it. Use these questions to answer and get the main features that you need. Now let's move on to static graph. We are now moving on to the type that does not have any time period, or just in a single time period. So we look at that one too and look at the type of questions we can ask ourselves and how we can get the main features. So let's go to static graph. When we were dealing with the static graph, or when I was explaining the static graph to you, I told you that this type of graph does not have any time period, okay, or just one single time period that they are dealing in. So when you are solving a question which deals with the static graph, you have to remember that you are going to compare the variables themselves, okay, because there is no time period for you to check the trend. There is no trend. All right, so you have to just compare the variables themselves. So there are some set of questions that you can ask yourself to help you get the main features that you need, and these are the questions that you be using. One, you have to ask yourself this first question: which of the variables recorded the highest and at what point? So this one include the highest overall or the highest at a particular point. Okay, so the highest among them, the greatest among them, the most used among them, the most popular. So this time you're using a comparative and superlative word. Okay, so you have to know the popular, the most popular, the most common, right? So the common type. So the highest among the point. Now the opposite side, which variable recorded the lowest? So static graph is about the highest point, the lowest point. All right, the next question is, are there any similarities? So sometimes you might get two variables at the same point. Maybe they are of the same height, or they were used the same, or the variables were having the same number. So those ones can be used as similarities. And any opposite difference. So sometimes you might have a clear difference between one of them. Okay, when you compare them, you find out that there is a clear difference between them. Sometimes it might reflect within the question, and when it comes there, you'll be able to find them easily. And then the last question is, are there any exceptional variable? Sometimes some of the variables might not even record anything at all, or there might be a very exceptional thing about it. So you can use those answers and then to help you to get your features that you need. Remember, not all the questions will get an answer, but while you are asking yourself, you might get answers for some of them, and you can use them to write your essay, whether you're going to deal with it in the overview or further explain it in your detailed paragraph. So let's look at an example and see how we can use these questions to solve or find out our key features. All right, let's look at this question. So this question is a bar chart which shows the percentage of Australian men and women in different age groups who did regular exercises or regular physical activity during in 2010. So you can see this one is in one time period, 2010. So obviously this is a static graph, and because it's in one time period, we cannot get whether it increased or decreased. No, we can't see that, so we just have to compare the variables as we said. If you look at this side, this shows the percentage. So this is 0, 10%, 20 up to 60%, and down here shows the age group from 15 to 65 years and over. So the shade here shows the male. So there's a male, males, and it's female for the black one. Right, so we now have assessed our question, and we just have to look out for the keywords, because we know key features, because we know that this is a static graph. We've already recorded the kind of questions we are going to ask ourselves, and we're using that to answer our question. So the first question is that which variable recorded the highest and at what point? So if you look through it, you find out that here, right, I think males were 52.8 and females of 47.7. Aside this one, females more than males, females here more than males, females here more than males, females here more than males, and even here we have the males to be 46.7 and the females to be 47.1. So it's still even more than the males. So aside the 15 to 24 stage, in all the age groups, the males actually involve themselves more in regular physical activities in all the age groups than the females actually involve themselves more in all the age groups than that of the males. Okay, so if you are going to record the highest, we know that females throughout the whole time period actually recorded more. They were higher than the males, but we are looking for the highest, which is the at what point. So if you see here, we have 52.5 and here 53.3 and then 53. So out of these three, we know that the 53.3 is the highest point. So the age group that actually recorded the highest among all the other ages is from 45 to 54 females. So the females between 45 and 54, age 45 and 54, recorded the highest number. Recorded the highest number among the others, among all the other age groups. What about the males? All right, so if you look at this side, you can find out that the males it's from 15 to 24. The age group 15 to 24 that recorded the highest. Okay, they recorded the highest number that actually like to do a lot of regular exercises in 2010. So we know that the highest in the males was between 15 to 24, while the highest in the females was between 45 to 54. Right, so we've got 1 point here. Let's go to the second question. Which variable recorded the lowest and at what point? So we know that generally the males were generally less than the females, as we did in the first discussion. But the lowest point for the females, right, is in the year 65 and over, where they got 47.1. Right, if you check this one, it's 47.7. So here 65 and over is actually 47.1%. So they recorded their lowest number above 65 years, right? When they are 65 years, it's actually when they recorded their lowest number. And then the lowest number of males, that of the age group, was actually recorded between 35 and 44. Those between 35 and 44 were the least when it comes to that of the males. They recorded the lowest percentage. All right, so we've been able to get all these points down. Let's go to the next question. All right, let's look at the next question. Similarities. Are there any similar thing about it? Are there any similarities? Okay, so if you check that of the females, are there any similarities? Okay, we can see that from age 35 to 64. They are the only age group above 50%. Okay, so over 50% of females exercise from age 35 to 54. So from age 35 to 54, over 50% of them exercise, and then almost the same percentage exercised in their old age, okay, in both gender. So if you take that of 65 and above, they are almost the same. This 46.7, 47.1. So almost the same number, or almost the same percentage of people actually exercised when they were old. All right, in the same gender, both males and females, the percentage were almost the same. So those are some of the similarities that we found. There is no clear difference here, so just wrote on not available. All right, so as I told you, it's not all the questions that you might get an answer. All right, so now let's look out for any exceptional thing. From this question, we know that the only exceptional thing about it, that when it takes that of the females, they were the top tier. They were actually the highest among all the age groups when it comes to the number who like to exercise. The only difference is that it's only the 15 to 24-year-old that had males more than females. So that is the only exceptional. That is the only different thing about the graph. Aside that, all of them had the same common thing. The females were more than the males. So higher percentage of women exercised than the males in all age group except the youngest. So except those that were young, which is from 15 to 24, all the other age group, or in all the other age groups, the females were more than the males. So you can see that these simple questions would help us to get the main features that we need. And this is for static graph. Simple questions like what are the differences, what are the similarities, what are the exceptions, what is the highest, what is the lowest. These simple questions will help you to get the answer that you need in static graph. Okay, so from the key answer that we received, we can summarize the most obvious features among them to write our essay. Okay, so as I stated, your features should be able to cover all the variables in the test, not forgetting to compare where relevant. So we saw that from the key features, we saw that while the females aged 45 to 54 recorded the highest number among the year group, the males peaked in the age group of 15 to 24. Okay, so the 15 to 24-year-old were the only males that were more than the females, but that of the females aged 45 to 54 recorded the highest number of people among all the other year groups. So the males had their highest in 15 to 24-year-olds, and that of the females had the highest in 45 to 54-year-old. Now, our second main feature that we're going to use is that a higher percentage of women exercise than males in all the age group except the youngest, that is from 15 to 24. So except those that were young, which is 15 to 24, a higher percentage of women actually exercise more than the men. All right, so these two features, we can just use them to write our overview and also our main details. So you can see that the main features covers all the variables. It covers the part of the females and also touch on the part of the males. So you can now use it to summarize the features in your overview and also explain in more details when you are writing the detailed paragraph. You have to take note that this particular method that I'm using, which is the static and the dynamic graph, it works for the four question types, the 5: multiple diagram, table, bar chart, line graph, and pie chart. So these ones are used for these 5. Okay, but when you are dealing with maps and process diagrams, the method for using is different. for getting your features is different. So we will learn on how to get the main features tool for maths and process diagram. So this is all that we need to know for today on how to get your main details when you are dealing with writing tax 1 question. I would urge that you get a lot of questions from the Cambridge IELTS and then ask yourself, find the main features using these questions that we have studied. You can also go over the lesson in order to understand it properly. All right, thank you, and meet you in our next lesson. Bye.